Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our afternoon Yes Speaker Series talk featuring Laura Stein. We'll share how design needs optimism and optimism needs design. My name is Ana Rita Mores, and I'm the chair for the School of Design at George Brown College, and I'd like to welcome you to our final talk for today for Yes. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that George Brown College is located on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and other Indigenous people who have lived here over time. We're grateful to share this land as treaty people who learn, work, and live in the community with each other. Across the School of Design, we remain committed to identifying and removing systemic barriers to accessing college programs and services, and are committed to working towards strategies, tools, and actions to better support our Indigenous student population. In a commitment to build connections and opportunities for students to engage with design's visionaries, Yes features a week-long lecture series. The design-focused speaker series has been cultivated in an effort to provide dynamic perspectives and unique discussion opportunities for members of our community, including students and faculty alike. Honest advice for designers from really good designers connects the School of Design with those who have impacted the industry on a local and global scale through a focused thematic-based lecture. This is followed by an opportunity for conversation and dialogue using the YouTube chat, so please feel free to read all of your questions for Laura there. With that, I'm proud to introduce Laura Stein. As partner and chief creative officer at Bruce Mau Design, Laura provides overall creative and strategic direction for the studio's brand and design output. Bruce Mau Design works across borders, cultures, and channels, helping organizations at every scale to grow and transform. Laura has grown her career at BMD, working with some of the most iconic brands and cultural institutions. For Laura, great design is about the clear ideas and the strong signals that rally communities. The way to get there is through strategic thinking, deep-seated stories, and inventive expression. Laura has led some of BMD's highest profile initiatives in recent years, including ASICS, ASICS Tiger, Sonos, and OCAD University. As creative director, she led a long-term partnership with Sonos, leading her team through the design of multiple facets of the wireless audio brand experience: digital, retail, social, packaging, and Sonos studio content. Her work has been featured in books such as Dynamic Identities and Designing Brand Identity, publications such as Fast Company, Communication Arts, Creative Review, Branding Magazine, Business Insider, as well as recognized by Cannes Lion, DNAD, among others. Leading the Q&A portion of today's talk is Jasmine Salang, who is an art director and graphic designer, fueled by her passion for creating meaningful solutions. Her work explores the intersection of design, strategy, introspection, and social good. She holds an advanced diploma from George Brown College's School of Design and Graphic Design, majoring in communications. She's currently obtaining her honors bachelor degree in brand design at the same institution. When she's not creating, she spends time journaling, learning about astrology, and organizing her Google Calendar, as a true Capricorn does. With that, I am pleased to turn it over to Laura, who will get us started with her presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Ana Rita, and so nice to meet you, Jasmine, and congratulations to all the grads. This is an amazing moment in your journey. Ana Rita did a nice job of talking a little bit about my career, but I thought I would kind of give you a little snapshot about my kind of windy path here. You may all find yourselves on a windy path as well. I have actually a fine art school education, a stint in a recording band and a touring band. I was in Europe and North America for many years. I held many jobs in New York City. I was an art mover. I was a book designer. I was an art director at an ad agency. And then I came back to Toronto and I landed at Bruce Mau Design. And I still remember my first day here. I remember walking into the studio, and it was a place that was so filled with light and big tables and these big rough-hewn bookshelves that were filled with books. And I kind of felt like I had found my place. I still feel like I kind of grew up here, and I did stay here for many years. Ventured into other places as well, recently Sidley, but have come back to the studio that I love. One of the things that I've loved was, and continues to be, this kind of culture of nerdy optimists. I think it feels like a place where there are a band of people thinking they can make change by making something more beautiful and more clear and more compelling or more sustainable. and that's exciting. So today, I'm going to talk about this. Design needs optimism, and optimism needs design. So to break that down a little bit, optimism is believing that things can get better. And design is imagining what exactly that better looks like, and then inventing and creating what lies ahead. So if we think about this a little bit, imagining what's possible and inventing what lies ahead. And I typically think about the inventing what lies ahead as kind of the hard part. That's where, as they say, when you're sort of about to start making something, that's where the rubber meets the road. And this involves giving that vision form. It involves doing the work. It involves making a thing in the world that includes detailed technical work, production constraints, client conversations, a whole host of other things that can prove to be a kind of challenging road. But sometimes the imagining what's possible part is the hard part. And I would say that these are tough times for an optimistic mindset. And I won't, of course, go into the laundry list of things that are facing us and that we sort of see on our 24-hour news cycle. But certainly many of these things have impacted us personally, or we are sort of glued to our phones or waiting and watching to see what the next kind of disaster is. I read a quote recently by somebody who had talked about the last 2 years having had multiple brushes with existential terror. And I found that was very, that phrase resonated with me. And we know that, right now, many of us do not feel optimistic. These are some stats that talk about, I'm going to be very clear about the difference between feeling not optimistic and feeling depressed, anxious, and having post-traumatic stress disorder. But I think these stats illustrate a sort of general sense of mental well-being. So in 2020, 1 out of 5 people in Canada screened positive for symptoms of depression, anxiety, or PTSD. And then in 2021, that jumped to 1 in 4. And again, these are when you're screening positive for these symptoms, that means that you're answering questions in a checklist that point to you potentially being clinically depressed or clinically anxious. But as an illustration of the kind of general anxiety and sometimes feelings of hopelessness that are facing us now, it's kind of undeniable that things have gotten a little bit tougher. I would say that even prior to the pandemic and all the sort of associated brushes with existential terror that I've just talked about, optimism has not always been an easy attitude to conjure for designers. But it is essential if we are to imagine, doing that big imagining, all good things are possible, and then invent. There are moments when we feel pessimistic, unengaged, uninspired, boxed in, constrained. We can't get it done. I think, as we move into our careers, there are moments that feel like highs and there are plenty of moments that feel like lows. And it's hard to feel those lows because as a designer, design is inherently needs to be optimistic in order to get those big imagining done. So are there things baked into our practice that can keep us optimistic, that can keep us feeling positive about what's next, authentically imagining and planning for a future something, a future brand, a future place, a future product, and not just sort of going through the motions and getting the project done? So today I'm going to talk about 3 strategies for cultivating optimism in a design practice. And I'm hoping that these strategies resonate with you, whether you're in a studio, whether you're working solo or working in-house. I will illustrate them with some of the work that I've done within a team, but I'll also talk a little bit about some of the interesting things that my colleagues have done as well. So the first sort of strategy is collaborate. And this is one that I I think does a lot of good in a lot of ways, but certainly it's something that is helpful as we're trying to cultivate a kind of optimistic mindset. The idea here is to find someone who can encourage you, galvanize you, support you, and build on ideas that you're both passionate about. You can build that kind of momentum and forward motion that builds on each other's ideas and that kind of riffing with each other. It's a bit of a yes and kind of situation where you can keep adding to someone's notion and sort of getting the shades richer and richer. And I think what is interesting here is, taking that sort of improv idea, yes and, there's no sort of no, it's always yes and, what else can we do? And the project that I'm going to talk about is something we did recently called, it's a little project, but has a very big name, Landscape Field Notes from a Post-Pandemic Future. And this is the Instagram handle. So this is, again, a little small project that we did recently with a collaborator. So we often work with architects, and one of the collaborators on a couple of projects is David Rubin Land Collective. And we worked with them on a park in Indiana. That's the Grand Junction Plaza. They are landscape architects and worked on the landscape, and we worked on the brand. And the other collaboration we've done with them is something for the University of Pennsylvania at their Innovation Center. And again, they worked on the landscape and we worked on the brand and collaborated on a kind of environmental graphic system. And they are a great practice who work on parks, public spaces, monuments across the US, and have a pretty strong point of view about the value of those public spaces that they're working in. Early in the pandemic, they called us and said, and this is probably, I'd say, April 2020, our phone has stopped ringing, our projects are on hold. It's feeling a little scary. We're twiddling our thumbs and wondering what's next. But we had an idea about making something, and we wanted to know whether you were interested. And we were interested in talking about how critical landscape and public space is. We were kind of in a similar situation at those early days of the pandemic where it was very quiet and very uncertain. And we thought, well, let's collaborate. Let's see what we can do. One of the interesting things about landscape is that it involves and touches on so many different aspects of our lives. But what we know is that not many people know about the intentionality about when we design these spaces. They don't necessarily see the design of these spaces. So the idea here was, can we create a kind of accessible introduction to the value of those landscapes and public places? So we met every 2 weeks. That's also a good part of collaboration where you hold each other accountable. And we mapped out themes and structures and talked about where this could go, what should it be. And we decided that it should be an Instagram account that was something in between a kind of set of explainer posts and a children's book, sort of a cross section between these two things, that could provide a very nice, easy, digestible format for this kind of information. It could be accessible to everyone, and it could provoke some thinking and perhaps some conversation. And perhaps it's a toe in the water for a future book. We knew that Land Collective would eventually own the work, post the work, and create that kind of content, but they needed a design framework within which they could do that, and a design language that could be all their own. So we provided an identity, and again, we were inspired by the warmth and vibrancy of 60s kids' books, these kind of organic shapes and elements and textures that you can really just mix and match and tell a host of different kinds of stories. And so that even non-designers or non-graphic designers can put these things together and start to create a kind of visual language that feels consistent across the account. And whether it's informational diagrams or charts or illustrations. We also worked to create a very warm color palette and a typography. And also came to a name together that was sort of reflects an interest in this idea of field notes, about going into the field and recording what you see and taking it back and thinking about it. So what we're calling this is landscape field notes from a post-pandemic future. And the idea here is that, it's the sort of new notes is, of course, on your phone. And the idea of being able to kind of be out in the world, seeing these different places, different landscapes, and understand what was actually happening in those landscapes. And this is all within the context of the learnings that we have from the pandemic. We help them create some editorial structures, and we set boundaries for the length of text and made sure that, there's a certain kind of word count and a certain kind of structure, and that we could always land on a kind of invitational question and ask people to consider and ponder. And what was kind of amazing about this collaboration is that, we learned a lot about landscape. One of the things that I learned in this particular chapter, I guess, was the idea that public parks were first cemeteries. I guess I should say that the other way. That the first public parks were in fact cemeteries, and there's a host of different kinds of nuggets of information that we started to understand a little bit more about our landscape, and they started to learn more about communication. So it's a really nice exchange of ideas while we kept building this project. We created a kind of world that had a lot of different stories, some of them galvanizing, some of them sort of inspirational. We had a few takeovers on the account, but it was amazing to have a partner to help us, push us into imagining, to invite us into an interesting project, and to kind of focus our energies with a collaborator on making something new together, and then to actually hold each other accountable enough to get it out into the world, even though it was a passion project. This is my shout out to the whole team at Land Collective, but also if you feel like following us, we are at Post-Pandemic Landscape. The second idea here that I want to talk about in terms of cultivating an optimistic mindset is about practicing play. And it's important to find the space to kind of fool around, to step away from deadlines and constraints, and to embrace experimentation and joy in your process. And, I know that we often think of ourselves correctly, that we are problem solvers, but this is sort of a step away for a moment from the sort of head down, I must crack it, must crack the thing that seems uncrackable. I'm on a deadline, trying to step away from that and to kind of reinvigorate the process with a sense of joy. And a project where we did this was something, was a new brand for Mars Discovery District. And many of you probably know Mars. It is one of Canada's most important innovation hubs. And it houses startups in different areas. And it creates a kind of education system. It creates a collaboration system for them. It creates networks. They help organize policy talks. It's educational and it's organizational, and it sort of catalyzes many of the startups into something bigger. And Fast Company did an article on it, calling it the kind of the anti-Apple. It's downtown, it's in the mix, it's where diversity really thrives. And cross-pollination is really key to the sort of ethos of this whole place. The building is super beautiful, but very rational, and it kind of belies a little bit of the mix-it-up feeling that happens on the inside. Our client said, I wish we could just sort of blow open the doors and show people what was happening. One of the things that they told us is, though, that we wanted to keep the logo. And this is a project I did with Sid Lee a few years ago, but interestingly enough, Bruce My Design had done the original logo and the original identity. And I would say that, this is what they looked like when we met them. But with the idea that, this is an old and sort of dusty identity. And in fact, this identity was created before the first iPhone was invented. So when you think about that kind of change that's happened in our culture and society since that moment, there's sort of no wonder that it feels a little bit needing of an injection. But our client, although they had big ambitions and they really wanted to, as they said, blow open the doors, they had a few constraints. They wanted us to keep the logo. They wanted us to keep the blue. And they said, and if there's anything we can do at all to keep that typeface, we would like to keep it. So of course, we started to sort of move things around and figure out what we can do with some of those key pieces as part of our exploration within those constraints. And the team was feeling fairly frustrated, and we had spent a good amount of time on research and understanding them and strategy and understanding what they wanted to accomplish. And so what we decided to do was put aside system, put aside identity, put aside all the sort of things that ideas and notions and rationality that goes into a brand identity system, and just start making posters. So we said, let's just think about this place as if we're coming to it new. We've never seen it before, and somebody would like us to make posters for the place that we've been spending a few months learning about. So we ended up stepping away and just making lots of posters. And this is a snapshot of it, of the ones that we actually ended up taking to the client. But we spent 2 days just almost getting our yayas out a little bit and thinking about this as just a step into the beyond. And it was fun, and people really enjoyed just making stuff that sort of reflected the feeling that they had had after being part of that research process. It was very free exercise, and you can see the kind of exuberance here. There's a lot of color. There's a sense of optimism and that kind of futuristic feel. So back to not changing the logo and the blue. We thought, let's reinterpret it. Let's think about this not just as a flat, opaque, and impenetrable kind of circle, but let's think about it as something that is actually dimensional. Let's open it up. Let's talk about what's inside. Let's talk about the processes and activity and thinking that happens on the inside. Let's blow open the doors. And we kept, of course, the core palette that you saw, but we also added a bunch of colors that kind of came from that poster exercise that were really vibrant, a nice orange, 2 kinds of green, a pink, and brought these all together in a kind of system where you can kind of see there we go. You can see the kind of vibrancy that happens when we keep that blue as an anchor. We've still got the gray, but bringing in that orange and pink and green, and these different kinds of colors and textures and patterns that start to really tell you about a place that's very active, very collaborative, and thinking about things in a really optimistic way. This is the identity in the sort of simplest execution. And then this is when we start to get into communications, where we think about typography and photography together, a pattern language, and what these kinds of orbs can feel like and sort of signal on their own as well. We reimagined what this might look like. Should we take this into an environmental world? And then social, of course, being pretty critical piece for them as they do a lot of outreach to entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs who want to join them. They also had a few different video series, and one of them was called Grit. And this was a sort of sub-brand that we had done. So taking some of the elements that we have from the identity and creating this kind of also very vibrant sub-brand that profiles different kinds of entrepreneurs and what it takes to bring a new product to market. And this is kind of a snapshot of where we landed. And I would say what is nice about the process that we went through and that kind of embracing play in the middle of that project, just stepping away, really started something on our team. And I had this, at that time, a great senior designer, Dominic Liu, who said, we have such great designers here. We have such great junior designers. I would love for them to think more about type as an expressive tool. There's a lot of illustration that we do that's really nice, but what if we just thought about typography as the kind of vehicle and really pulled and pushed and stretched that and saw what we could do there? So he started something that he was calling Tuesday Type Club. And he invited designers to join him every 2 weeks. He would send out a brief for something nonsensical, like a new zoo is opening up, or I don't know, a whole host of different kinds of situations. And then the team would respond with posters and thinking about using type in different ways and pushing and pulling that. And initially it was just a small little club, and more and more people wanted to join and just be part of this and spend a little bit of time on their lunch hours to kind of get their yayas out and sort of practice that play in the middle of the day. And this is a little snapshot of the kinds of super fun, super expressive things that people were making. The last project that I'm going to talk about is something called Project for Public Spaces. And this illustrates an idea here around optimism and seeing the work change something out in the world. I think the more you see things change, the more you think that you're producing change, the more that feeds the optimism and helps us kind of understand that, yes, things can change and that we can make things better. So this idea here is working with people committed to making change. Other optimists is infectious. Taking on ambitious clients who want to move the needle, working with organizations that want to make impact. These are ways that we can start to understand the power that we have as designers to actually help envision, but also invent. So Project for Public Spaces, this is an organization that is based in New York. They are a really interesting organization that has been around a long time and are credited often with starting the placemaking movement. And placemaking is really about thinking about places as places where people congregate, thinking about places from a community perspective, from a people's perspective, versus a design or an architectural or development kind of perspective. It shifts the focus, and it also is something that engages people. So they really believe in the idea of co-creation and thinking that the people who are going to be using the places should have a say in what these places are like. As I mentioned, they've been around for a long time. This was their current logo. I don't have a tech reference for this one, but the idea here that is, I think, a good one, the idea of circling something, kind of creating a community. You can kind of see the idea of a map unfolding in this icon. But what we really wanted to do was to really emphasize that notion of possibility within this organization. So they really help communities think about different possibilities, about thinking about their own communities, envisioning something new. And we emphasize that in a mark. So here you can see we've changed it still emphasizing public spaces. You can see the sort of underline, but these underlines become a kind of fill in the blank notebook. This is about relationships and stories and experiences that people have as they co-create a public space. And so what we're doing here is creating a kind of brand that is about a fill in the blank. And we can do it at a high level. We could talk about Washington Square Park specifically. We can talk about our mission. We can talk about the different kinds of things that happen in these places. So the project 4 becomes a kind of introduction to almost anything is possible. You could see the kind of vibrancy that we brought to the identity here too, and that our color strategy was really about creating these kind of anchor colors with a vibrant pairing. So we have a really nice rich green with a lighter green, and a rich kind of rusty red with an orange, deep blue with a light blue. And this allows us to kind of keep the vibrancy, but also create enough contrast that we can create things like these different lines. And I should say too that the lines are a way, there's a kind of fill in the blank, but at some point the lines sort of take on a life of their own and become these kind of doodles and illustrations that start to give life to some of these lists of things. So project for dreams, stories, families, communities, neighborhoods, cities, collaboration, diversity, people, change, ideas, impact, innovation, sustainability, and well-being. And these are all sort of ganged up together with this kind of looping line that provides a kind of dynamism and interest in these longer narratives. We also get really specific about what some of these projects might be. Project for Sunday afternoons, walking your dog, making friends, first dates. We also start to think about a project for better cities, a place to sit, green neighborhoods, streets that work, more shade. And this works, we have this kind of very specific typographic approach to the messaging, but photography fits in really well here as well. And they do work with cities and governments, so being able to be a bit more buttoned down is important as they submit sometimes their reports. The kind of doodles provided a nice way to kind of create an iconography that was a shorthand for certain elements in their practice. And also a set of icons that kind of signal what we're looking at. So on their social posts, a way to do quotes, a way to kind of draw us across an Instagram carousel. And then what this starts to look like with some of their actual materials that they use within the communities to understand what communities are looking for. And then their tagline is the idea of made by all and used by all, and it becomes a really graphic kind of tagline once we bring in the doodles and the line work. And I would say, we are lucky enough to have clients who do come to us and look for, who are looking to make change, who are looking to make either societal or environmental change. But there are so many groups that are out there also looking to make change. The RGD used to do pre-pandemic these are really amazing design-a-thons, and I'm not sure if any of you have participated, but the idea is that an NGO or not-for-profit presents a brief, and the brief is cracked within 12 hours. And it's an interesting way to give really small organizations who don't have enough money for design services a little bit of a pro bono work that will sort of satisfy a specific kind of need. And then, of course, there's this sort of guerrilla approach, which I'm just putting here because this is one of my favorite guerrilla things in my neighborhood, which is just revealing something to people. Instead of it saying trash or garbage, it now says landfill, and it's sort of telling us exactly what it is. This is not sort of a euphemism for trash and garbage suddenly become euphemisms for something that will never go away. That is our landfill. And that is it. Sort of 3 ways at maintaining that kind of optimistic outlook in our practice. We'd love to hear questions.
Thank you so much, Laura, for that super inspiring talk. I really admire how you and the team at Bruce Mao have created such a dynamic and optimistic system in every project that you've worked with, and for sharing all of your tips with us. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, I have a few questions prepared, and then if anyone has any other questions, then feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll be sure to answer them. So the first thing I wanted to ask is, what is the process like at Bruce Mao Design? How have you kind of helped lead your team to bring the imaginative possibilities to life and to help inspire them and explore?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of collective imagining is really important. And sometimes we have these kickoffs where we will sort of understand what the brief is and understand some of the ambitions and goals of the project, and then do a kind of almost collective mind map of what are the potentials here? What does that make you think of? What are some themes that are emerging? What does that make you think of? And sort of spin it out in a kind of free associative kind of way, and find our way back to what are the right I guess paths to take within that sort of bigger imagining. And those we actually do in both the design phases, but also research. I find that once we kind of understand what a client is thinking about, it's sort of jamming on what are the themes that could be interesting here? What should we be investigating? If we're talking about something that has to do with, wellness, what are the sort of tentacles that might go out into the world that can lead us to asking more interesting questions?
Mm-hmm. And along with the theme that we have going on today with designing with optimism, and also designing kind of after the pandemic, what things are you looking forward to most with coming back in person, if your studio is slowly and gradually coming back? And what things have you learned throughout your time working in the pandemic that you'd like to bring to the studio in person going forward?
Yeah, these are great questions, and I think about them pretty much every day. We have started, I am in the studio now, and we've come back 2 days a week. So we're here Tuesday and Thursday, and I think it feels like that's becoming a new normal, a bit of a standard in some places. And one of the things I think we all have found is like that sometimes things take longer when you're together, because you're not just head down at your computer. There is more conversation, but I think there is more joy in working together and having a moment where you're looking at somebody else's screen, or what else are you working on, or let's talk about this project, or doing posters or whatever it is. There's more joy, and there's more expansive thinking too. So I think that you just kind of, I think that was the thing that I was missing quite a bit, was just rubbing up against other people's ideas a little bit and understanding how that can influence your own thinking. We do something called, every year we do something called, and the name started many years ago, so I can't even really trace it back to you, but we call it our haiku book. And it's kind of like a yearbook, like a designer's yearbook, where we take the detritus of the studio and sketches and diagrams and weird things that we've written on Post-it notes and overheard sayings and funky photographs, and kind of compile them in some kind of format that kind of gives them all shape. And during the pandemic, it was much harder to make these haiku books, because there was just nothing tangible and physical to kind of collect and then reproduce. And for me, those books are really important, because they are kind of like evidence of a joyful practice.
That's actually a really fun idea. I might take that. Oh, awesome. I think we have a couple of audience questions. Okay, Christy says, how do you recommend maintaining an optimistic approach if working with a not so optimistic teammates?
Yes, very good question. And tricky. I, I mean, sometimes it's leading by example and being able to maybe make some things that you can kind of put out into the team that feel like they're taking that leap forward, even if they seem sort of crazy and notionally out there. Maybe there's a way of looking at that, bringing that expansive thinking to the table, regardless. Not feeling like, well, maybe they'll poo-poo it or not feel like it's interesting, but continually doing that. That might, it might provide a kind of infectious. Maybe we shouldn't be using those words anymore, but maybe it might provide a kind of way to get everybody on board eventually.
Yeah, definitely. I think we also have another question similar to that by Leslie. How do you balance optimism and play with more serious topics?
That's a great question too, and I think that it doesn't always need to be even if the topic is serious, you can still bring a sense of play to it. So the idea of being able to, bring play and expansive thinking and collaboration and kind of the joy in making stuff, even when it's a serious topic, I think that's still there, even if we're not maybe laughing and having it's not a kind of raucous kind of play. It's still that kind of notion of experimentation and the kind of pleasure in experimentation that we can bring to the work. So I think there's still room for that. There's still room for trial and error and stepping away from the kind of head down brief for a moment, just to imagine new possibilities.
Thank you for that answer. I want to bring it back to a little bit about your talk. So you mentioned practicing play, and for me personally, I always tell myself, okay, I'm gonna just experiment, do a type poster on my free time, or I'm gonna just like do something within design for fun, and I never get to do it. I always kind of not prioritize that as much. So I'm wondering, like, how do you have any advice for incorporating play more often to your work or in the personal work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have felt that for sure. I think that collaboration piece is pretty important. There's something really nice about if there's a way to do it with someone. I think that they can kind of pull you in and help you. You can kind of galvanize each other and push each other a little bit to actually get it done. Like, oh no, I've got something due for Tuesday. And that's kind of what happened with the Tuesday Type Club too, where people did do it on their lunch hour and probably would sneak an hour or two at work every now and then too, just to kind of get things done. But things did definitely ramped up on Monday, I would say. And so there's a kind of giving yourself a deadline, giving yourself a group of people to do this with. I think that always helps. This is not the same thing, but I started running more seriously in the past few months. And I would not have done that had I not had somebody to run with every Sunday. And that really helped get me out the door, even though I had plenty of other things to do. But it was that, that person is waiting, 2 p.m., I better meet them. So I think the doing it with a partner or a group can be helpful.
I love that. I think that's something that I'll try to incorporate into my own practice. I'll get some friends to design with on our free time, or like have maybe self-initiated challenges for ourselves. I think that's really fun.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, in terms of design and strategy, do you ever find that it's difficult to push your ideas further? Because I think, for at least for myself and maybe some other students might be able to relate, that with design, it kind of puts you in a box and you kind of think, okay, logo, type, color palette, and dynamic brand systems have been a more interesting approach and more evolutionized approach to design. So I'm wondering, like, how do you get to that place where you can come from thinking inside the box to outside the box?
Yeah, I think, just think for a moment.
Sorry, it's a long question.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I think you're right about what is nice about dynamic identities is it kind of broke down the sort of categories. It's like, I need the logo, I need a image style, I need a something or other, I need this other thing. And so that, I think there's something nice about and freeing about maybe we don't have to tick all those boxes as we figure out a system and then come back and see what's happening. I think that there's something interesting sometimes about looking at, we spend so much time looking at design. Is there a way that we can also look at art or architecture or other practices that maybe are doing something different? So that's not maybe even thinking about an idea that takes shape physically and thinking, oh, okay, that's an interesting notion. There's an interesting concept there. What would that look like visually? And sometimes when we don't often do mood boards per se, because I feel like sometimes those things put you in a box, but we do try to look at some other, sometimes expand our thinking and points of reference to include things that are sort of outside the specific design that we're working on, to see what comes of bringing that into the conversation.
Christine Doe, she made a comment, and it's a really good point. She says, I like to think of dynamic brand systems as an open invitation to play. It's like a creative sandbox.
Yeah, that's great.
I think I have one more question, then I'll take one more from the audience. So you mentioned that you kind of had a winding path within your career. So I'm wondering, sorry, someone who wants to be involved with strategy but still love design, how did you find your path, and how did you find your way along the path to where you are now?
I think I followed my nose a little bit at first, and I think there's a moment where I was also thinking about, well, I've got to eat. And that was after art school. I think I wasn't sure exactly what I would do with my fine art degree. I knew I loved ideas and I knew I loved visuals. And as I started to experiment a little bit more, especially being in a band where we started to just make a lot of things, that helped me think about stepping outside a kind of fine art context and think about things that might be more in a graphic design context. And then almost trying my hand at a bunch of different things. So I did work I was a typesetter at an ad agency for a long time, and just understood how you could set type. And that sounds kind of old-fashioned probably, but learning little pieces of craft as I sort of skipped through many of these different places. I freelanced for a little while. I was probably too junior to freelance in a very, I didn't learn as much as I probably could have had I sat down, but I did learn the things I liked, and I did learn the things I did not like. And so when I finally found the thing that I really liked, I knew I wanted to stay. But it is kind of listening to what's going on and do I like this? I think sometimes I have a tendency to make sure I just do the thing, what is required of me, what is people ask of me. So sometimes I don't stop and think, oh, do I actually like this or not? So it's just making sure that you're kind of asking yourself these questions and reflecting on where you are. And if you're not where you are, then thinking about, okay, let's try something else to see if that will take me where I want to be.
Thank you for that advice. Yeah. I find that as a student who has done the graphic design program at George Brown, and now that I'm exploring brand and strategy, I kind of find myself wanting to be polarized, like either one or the other. But I think it's just finding a happy medium between both.
Yeah, I would also say that designers who are strategic thinkers, like if you can bring that kind of strategy into the design, that's that makes sure that the design is actually doing something. And if you're a strategist who understands design and loves design, that's also an amazing place to be, because you can understand what the repercussions of the design of the strategy might be further on. And sometimes places make you choose, and sometimes they don't. So it depends on the approach.
Yeah, for sure. And then I'm gonna leave it off with one more question from Emily. Just sending off for everybody. What is the best piece of advice that you've received, and the best piece of advice that you've given?
Ooh. First, this is a great question. I think that I would say the best piece of advice I've ever received was, don't run home. Walk home, wander home from work, unwind, unspool, and also walk to work. I found I don't walk as much anymore, but I find moments to be able to kind of cut my TTC path and then start walking. But just those moments of just free thinking, where you're just walking and thinking, is fantastic if we're, I don't know, solving something that you didn't think needed solving. Best I've ever given. It's hard to know, because I'm not sure what the outcomes have been for people.
Or any advice that you have for the graduates of this year?
Yeah, I mean, I might pass on that advice of wandering. I think that, maybe, I'm not sure if you've been following the sort of research around spending time in parks and spending time with green spaces and that kind of thing, which I fully have experienced on an anecdotal level, how much better that makes me feel. But I think there's something also nice about wandering in a city and seeing the kinds of interventions and creativity and things that are out and about that just kind of fill you with inspiration, and just that taking pleasure in wandering and letting your mind kind of ramble as well.
So thank you so much. I think that brings us to time. So thank you again, Laura, for the amazing talk, the amazing advice that you've shared, and it's really great meeting you. Be sure to register for our next event tomorrow at 11 a.m. We have Meg Lewis joining us, and also Chrissy Jones will be moderating that talk. So be sure to register. Follow us on Instagram at, sorry, I run the social media account, I should know this. SOD_yes, and also check out our website, yes.schooldesign.ca. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. Thank you, everyone. Take care.